fought hard to get custody of my younger sister after our parents passed away. But during the hearing, my uncle claimed I was too irresponsible because I worked nights, even though he only wanted her so he could access the inheritance money. I was 22 when my entire world was turned upside down, and to be honest, I don't even know if I have processed it at all yet, but I will try to break it down the way it went down. My name is Jewelora, and I'm from a little town in northern Indiana, kind of one of those places where everyone knows who you are and what your family's like before you even know it yourself. I had just started working nights at a local hospital as a nursing assistant, not flashy but paid the rent, and was the stepping stone towards nursing school, something I had wanted since I was a child. My parents, Marin and Desmond, were both in their 50s, neither young nor old, and they were killed in a car crash on a rainy Thursday night late in October. I remember even now the smell of rain on the sidewalk when the sheriff came to my door, how his hat dropped water onto his coat, and he couldn't look at me at first. He told me there'd been an accident, that the ambulance had tried, but both of them were dead before they could even get to the hospital. I never recall even crying right away. My younger sister, Maya, was only 12 years old and was sleeping in her bedroom when I heard the news. I was standing in the hallway outside of her closed door for what must have been an hour, trying to figure out how I was going to tell her that our lives had just been forever broken. I entered her room, sat at the foot of her bed, and shook her awake. She rubbed her eyes and asked me why I was looking so white, and I simply told her bluntly, because I could not sugarcoat such a thing. She screamed at me to stop lying, then she wept into my lap for hours until she was tired and slept again. That night was the longest night of my life. The next few days were a blur of funerals, casseroles from around the neighborhood, and whispered conversations down the church hall about what would happen to Maya now. I was young, I confess, but I was her sister, and I knew with every fiber of my being that she was meant to be with me. My uncle Bernard, my dad's older sibling, came to the funeral in a crumpled suit that still bore the faint scent of cigar. He embraced me, but stiffly, theatrically, and he didn't even actually bend down to comfort Maya. He just slapped her on the head like a dog and said she'd be okay. I didn't even notice it at the time, because I was beside myself with grief. But a week later, he showed up on our doorstep once more with papers in his hand and announcing to me that he wanted to adopt Maya. I was shocked. He was 48 years old, 2 towns away, and he'd never been that close to us. He didn't even call on holidays. He didn't even have any kids of his own, and his wife, Eliza, had left him years ago. The way he mouthed stepping up for family was insincere, like reading lines he assumed people wanted him to say. When I told him that I planned to petition for guardianship in my own name, he gave me the intense stare, and he sneered like I was some kind of make-believe adult little girl. "You're 22, Jewelora," he said. "You work nights, you struggle to keep your head above water, and you think the court will just award you a kid? Wake up." That hurt, but it also enraged me. I wasn't going to let him bully me out of taking care of my sister. I filed for custody within a week, and that was the start of a nightmare that I had never imagined I would struggle to escape. I thought my case was clear-cut. I was her sister. I lived in the same house that she had brought up in. I was employed, and I cared about her. But when lawyers entered the scene, things became twisted. Bernard claimed that because I worked nights, I wouldn't be able to provide a stable routine to Maya. He painted me as irresponsible, immature, and more of a party person who was interested in living my young life than being a child's guardian. I wanted to scream in court when he said those things, but my lawyer pushed me hard and asked me to remain silent. I offered proof of my earnings, my attendance at school, and letters from Maya's teachers assuring how close we were and how stable she had been under my care. But Bernard had a wild card that I had not known about, the inheritance. My parents had left a life insurance policy that was not big, but big enough to cover college and daily costs for Maya until adulthood. Bernard intimated, subtly but deliberately, that the money would be safer with him than with me. He would make statements like, "I don't want it squandered," and "Jewelora is still figuring out her own future." It was as if he didn't care so much about Maya and was more concerned with having access to that account. The nights after the hearings were the worst. I'd come home from my hospital shift exhausted, sometimes at 7 a.m., and Maya would be sitting at the kitchen table with circles under her eyes because she couldn't sleep unless she knew I was home safe. She'd ask me if the judge was going to make her live with Uncle Bernard, and I didn't know what to say. I had wanted to promise her that she'd never have to leave, but I couldn't lie. I promised her I was working as hard as I could, and I reminded her of all those times our parents had told us to stick together no matter what. She held on to me like I was the only branch above water. I felt like I was letting her down every time I left for work, but quitting wasn't in the budget. If we didn't have that check, we couldn't even buy groceries. I started to worry that Bernard was right, not because I thought he would be a better caretaker, but because I worried the court would see my long hours and low pay as proof that I wasn't ready. But what do you do when the truth in your heart heart isn't the photo you can record on paper? That was the question that haunted me through every sleepless day and every long night in the hospital. By the time the official custody hearing came around, Maya was more agitated than I'd ever witnessed. She begged the judge not to send her to Bernard's, and she told him how I helped her with schoolwork, cooked with her, and tucked her in when I was home. She said I was the only one who made her feel safe after Mom and Dad died. Bernard's lawyer objected that she was too young to make a rational decision. I wanted to scream again. It was like all of her threads of voice were being disregarded because they didn't fit his agenda. I was calm on the outside, but quietly fumed. That day, I knew it was no longer about custody. It was about proving to the court, to Bernard, and maybe even to myself that I was more than the parts of me. I was a sister who loved her brother enough to fight through an inferno of its own to save her. The battle in the courtroom went on longer than I ever thought it would, and every day felt like a life of plodding along with a boulder in my chest, as if I could never fully breathe no matter what I did. I was attempting to keep my life in order on 2 levels, getting Maya to school, assisting her on projects, paying the bills, and then going to the hospital at night when I had to maintain a steady hand turning patients, drawing vitals, and comforting families that were losing their own. Certain evenings, I'd stand in the supply closet for 1 minute to allow myself to cry because I couldn't do so in front of Maya, nor could I permit my co-workers to view me shattering. Bernard, on the other hand, seemed to have plenty of time. He appeared before the court in matching suits with shined shoes, reclining in his chair as if he was running the entire show. He even began showing up at Maya's school, which drove me crazy, because he'd give her these tidbits about how much easier things would be if she were with him, how he could provide her with a bigger home and better things. She came home one time with a new backpack that he bought her, and I swear it felt like a kick in the stomach. I wanted to rip it off her and say she wasn't taking anything from him, but she was 12 and all she cared about was feeling safe. I had to sit her down and inform her that gifts didn't translate to love, and that Bernard wasn't doing it for her because he loved her, but because he wanted to win. She looked at me with these big, scared eyes, and she said, "But what if the judge believes him more than you?" I didn't know what to say. I just repeated to her that I was fighting, and I wasn't going to stop. And then there was one specific hearing in January that I will never forget. It had snowed all night, and I very nearly didn't make it because my car skidded into the ditch driving. Some good Samaritan pulled over to help me with his truck, and I showed up 10 minutes late, frazzled and snowy, while Bernard was already seated with his attorney quietly flipping through his papers. The judge glared at me like I was irresponsible, and I knew I wasn't helping my case. Bernard's lawyer started hammering on how my evening shift put Maya out there by herself, though she was sleeping with a neighbor during those hours. They had her sound deserted. I wanted to scream that I was working my back out to buy her groceries, that I was sacrificing everything, but courts do not care about feelings. They care about schedules and systems and numbers on paper. My lawyer tried to distract with references to Bernard's financial motives, but Bernard maintained his face calm, almost smug, and spouted all the right words about family responsibility and providing stability. I could sense my hands shaking under the table. From that point on, I started keeping a record of everything. I wrote down every assignment of homework that I helped Maya with, every parent-teacher conference that I attended, every meal we cooked together. I even had copies made of our photos at church or the park so that I could tell the judge what our life was. I didn't want there to be any doubt that Maya did have a home with me and not just a place to sleep. At the same time, however, I could see tension consuming her. She stopped sleeping at night, started biting her nails so they would bleed, and in the morning she begged me not to take her to school for fear Bernard would bring her home without telling me. I kept assuring her again and again, and I phoned the school to establish more stringent rules, but it was pitiful to observe her shouldering so much terror on her little shoulders. She shouldn't have to be a child, with her own life torn in two by a tug of war. In February, I was summoned to the judge's chambers for a confidential meeting with Maya's guardian ad litem, the individual who was appointed to be Maya's voice. She was middle-aged Carla, quiet but quick-witted, and she fired off pointed questions regarding how I would care for Maya in the long term. She wanted to know my income, my career plans, what I would do in the case of an emergency. I told her the reality, that I wasn't rich, that I worked hard, and that I was studying to be a nurse, which would ultimately give me a stable and higher income. I told her about my parents, how they instilled in us that family stands by family, and I informed her that I could not imagine a life where my little sister was raised with someone who thought of her as a ticket. Carla listened attentively, took notes, and when she requested details about Bernard, I could not help myself. I explained to her that I did not believe he was interested in custody for the proper motives, that he had not previously had a relationship with Maya, and that his interest otherwise would not have held true except for the inheritance. My voice was shaking, but I did hold her eye the whole time. Later, when I arrived back home, Maya was lying on the couch with her backpack still not opened, her eyes glued to the wall. I asked her what was wrong, and she told me that Bernard cornered her after school and told her, "When you're living with me, you'll get to go on trips, not just sit around this little house." She wanted to know if it happened, if she'd be with him, and I couldn't take it anymore. I held her tight and promised, maybe foolishly, but promised that I would never allow this to happen. She cried so hard her whole body shook, and I went on repeating that I loved her, that we would make it through this even though I had no idea how. March had finally come, and with it another huge hearing. This time, I went out of my way and saw to it that everything was perfect. I showed up early, dressed neatly, with all my documents in order. Bernard's lawyer tried the same angle again, calling me too young, too financially unstable, too busy with work. But then Carla spoke, and I'll never forget her words. She said, "While Ms. Leora's situation is not without its challenges, she demonstrates commitment, responsibility, and a genuine bond with her sister. Mr. Bernard has not shown the same level of previous involvement, and his motives for the inheritance cause concern." For the first time in months, I thought someone was finally looking at things realistically. Bernard's jaw was clenched, and he refused to glance my way. I received a spurt of hope that I had not allowed myself to feel previously. However, the judge did not make a decision that day. They said more evaluation was needed, and the final ruling would be scheduled in April. Walking out of that courtroom, my hands were trembling, but this time from relief mixed with fear. Relief because someone had finally said out loud what I'd been screaming in my head all along. Fear because nothing was final yet, and Bernard wasn't the kind of man to back down easily. On the way home, Maya rode in silence with her eyes cast out the window, and she spoke softly. "Do you think we're gonna win?" I told her that I didn't know, but I did have faith in us. Undefined, and for the first time, I believe that she did too. April had been the longest month of my life, like every day was stretched out to a week, and every week felt like a year, because everything hung on the final hearing in court. I was about to turn 23 at the start of the month, but there was no party, no cake, no laughing, just me sitting in the kitchen table staring at a pile of bills and law papers while Maya tried doing her math homework beside me. She said she could make me a birthday card, and I smiled and said certainly. So she drew a crooked heart on notebook paper and printed out, "You're the best sister mom ever." I swear I almost wept right then, for it was so sweet and so tragic all at once, reminding me how much was on her shoulders and how much was on me to hold us together. I taped that card on the fridge door, and whenever I looked at it, it reminded me why I was having a problem. But pressure only mounted when Bernard started ratcheting up his attacks. His lawyer made motions questioning my financial health for my records of hospital shifts, even trying to paint me as untrustworthy because of one late utility bill more than a month late after the funeral. He combed through the whole of my life searching for flaws. I felt as though I was under surveillance at all times, as though even the smallest mistake could be twisted into evidence against me. One night, after yet another exhausting workday, I came home to find Maya sobbing in her room. She heard two girls talking at school about how her uncle told them that she would be moving in with him shortly, and she took that to mean that it was already in place. I sat with her on the floor, and we both cried, because I was so weary of fighting, and she was so scared of losing her home. I guaranteed to her, regardless of what they did, I would never lose my position as her sister, never lose my place in her life. But deep down, I knew if the judge ruled against me, it would not matter what I promised. She'd be stuck with Bernard, and I'd only be able to see her when he allowed me to. That bothered me at night more than the rounds at the hospital ever bothered me. The hearing came on a gray Tuesday morning. The courthouse had a faintly stale paper and coffee scent to it, and my stomach growled as I sat down next to my attorney. Bernard sat across from me, quick in another expensive suit, and he gave me this confident half smile like he already knew he was going to win. I met his eyes. The judge started by going through both of our sides, detailing the facts of my earnings, my availability, and my age, and then Bernard's possessions, his home, and his financial security. For a second, I thought that it was all over, that the odds were against me, and I was going to lose everything. But then the judge looked at Maya and asked her if she had anything she wanted to say. My heart came to a standstill. She stood up, little and shaking, but her voice was firm when she said, "I want to live with my sister. She takes care of me. She loves me. Uncle Bernard has no idea what I like to eat." The courtroom went silent, and Bernard moved uncomfortably in his chair. My lawyer gave a closing statement about the bonds of family, about how the law wasn't going to be about who had the bigger check, but about the well-being of the child. Bernard's lawyer rebutted, saying I was too small, too bony, and Maya required structure that I wouldn't be able to provide. He just kept returning to the money, implying that Bernard would be more likely to guard it for her benefit in the future. That's when I realized that the entire struggle had been over the inheritance the entire time. It wasn't even about Maya. The judge called for recess, and I sat outside in the hallway with Maya griping my hand so hard I could hardly breathe. but I did not let go. Bernard walked past us, low under his breath so that no one else would hear. "This isn't over, kid." I wanted to scream at him, but I kept my eye on Maya, on soothing her. When the court came back in, the judge said slowly, carefully, as if every word weighed 100 pounds. They acknowledged my struggle, the late nights, the financial sacrifice, that I was still young. But they acknowledged the love, the stability, and the undeniable bond Maya and I shared. They brought up Bernard's lack of prior engagement and the questionable motives behind his sudden interest following our parents' deaths. Finally, the judge spoke the words I'd been so desperately hoping to hear. "Custody is awarded to Ms. Jewelora." For a moment, I didn't even process it. I just sat there in shock, and then Maya just burst into tears and clung to me. My lawyer mouthed congratulations, and I was struck with this wave of relief so strong I thought I was going to pass out. Bernard's face reddened, his jaw set, and he stormed out without a word. The weeks following the verdict were a strange mix of calm and repercussions. Maya finally settled into place for the first time in months, sleeping at night, smiling more, humming even when she did the chores. I then relaxed and took a breath, but also I retained this lingering rage against Bernard, against what he had tried to rip us apart for, not out of love, but greed. I was told by neighbors that he remained agitated, remained furious about appealing the decision, but never did anything about it. Perhaps he realized that the court had gotten wise to him, or perhaps he just lost interest once he knew he couldn't get his hands on the money. Whatever it was, I no longer cared. All I desired was to keep Maya safe and give her the life our parents would have given her. However, it wasn't as easy. Getting custody didn't rid me of the financial difficulties, didn't change the fact that I continued to work nights and sometimes came home so tired I could barely keep my eyes open. But now, the exhaustion felt different. It was intentional. Like every ounce of energy I spent on work and on caring for Maya was worth it. She would start leaving me little notes in my lunchbox, photographs of the two of us cooking together, or stick figures holding hands under a rainbow, and those carried me through. Every time I doubted myself, I would read one of her little notes, and it reminded me that I did not have to be perfect. I just had to be there. I'll never forget when she came to me and said, "I feel like Mom and Dad are proud of us." We sat on the porch, the sun setting, the air warm after a long winter, and she said it in such a matter-of-fact way that I felt tears jump into my eyes before I could catch them. I pulled her close and whispered, "I hope so." For that was all I wanted, to grant their wishes by protecting the little girl they adored with all their hearts, and I felt as if maybe I was doing something noble in that moment. Life after the custody battle wasn't a fairy tale ending, but it was ours, and that meant everything. By the time summer rolled around, Maya had finally started to look like a kid again, instead of like someone carrying the weight of grown-up problems. She laughed when she was watching cartoons. She begged me to make pancakes on Saturday mornings, and she started making friends in the neighborhood. I was still pulling nights at the hospital, and occasionally that meant she was stuck staying with our neighbor, Mrs. Anders, who was nice enough to take her for an evening, but Maya understood now. She didn't cry when I went off to work anymore. She hugged me hard and sent me off safe. I started to pay attention to little things about me too. I had aged in ways I had not expected. I was more cautious, more warily so, and sometimes more tired than a 23-year-old should be. But I was stronger too, as if I had entered a role that was not chosen, but necessitated. I remember sitting in the kitchen one night with bills piled in front of me, and I was smiling, not because the bills were enjoyable, but because I wasn't scared anymore. I had been in a courtroom, lawyers, and Bernard, and I had come out still holding my sister's hand. That meant I could do anything. But Bernard did not disappear completely, and that was something I had to deal with. A few months after the decision, he called me out of the blue. His voice was calm, too calm, and he said he wanted to know if I'd let Maya spend a weekend with him. My stomach knotted up. I told him no, that it wasn't going to be, and he gave this icicle laugh and said, "You think you've won, but you're just setting yourself up to fail. You can't keep doing that." I hung up on him, shaking in my hands, and blocked his number, but his words stayed with me. There was a part of me that was afraid that he would attempt it again, maybe by court order, maybe some other way, and I couldn't shake that fear. So I worked extra hard to ensure Maya felt safe with me. I did not badmouth Bernard to her, because I did not wish that extra weight on her, but I made it clear to her that home was here, that there was nothing and no one who could change that. She started to come to terms with it more and more with each passing day. Something that continues to resonate is when school started up again in the fall. Maya's teacher instructed the class to write an essay about their hero. I had no idea about it until she assigned me the essay at the dinner table, with a smile spreading from ear to ear. She had written 2 pages about me, about how diligently I worked at the hospital and still managed to make her favorite spaghetti, about how I woke up with her when she had nightmares, about how I fought for her in court when she was afraid of being sent away. She wrote, "My sister is my hero because she never gave up on me." I cried so hard I had to go outside to the bathroom. Reading those lines, I noticed no matter how many times a day I questioned myself, Maya never questioned me. To her, I was sufficient, and that was worth more than any salary or fancy house Bernard could offer. Over time, things seemed to settle into a routine. I got through school and I became a registered nurse, giving us more stability. Maya grew up into a teenager who had an opinion about everything from fashion to music to the way I scrambled eggs. Occasionally, she rolled her eyes in my direction. Occasionally, we had arguments with curfews, but underneath all that typical teen attitude was a relationship that couldn't be shattered. Strangers at church or neighbors every now and then would tell me that they wish they had as much nerve as I did for becoming the man at such a young age, and while I appreciated it, I always assumed the truth was different. I didn't step up because I was chivalrous. I did it because I had no choice. She was my sister, and when you love somebody that much, you fight no matter what the cost. Looking back now, I can admit there were nights I lay awake torturing myself about whether Bernard had been right about me, whether I was too young, too naive, too pulled too thin to give Maya what she needed. But then I think of all the times she'd smiled at me when I showed up at her school play, the kisses she gave me when she got home from school with A's, the way she clung to me when she had her first broken heart. And I know that I provided her with something Bernard never did. I gave her love that wasn't monetary, love that wasn't conditional, love that wasn't with strings attached. And she gave something in return. She gave me purpose. She gave me a reason to fight, to grow, to become someone greater than I ever imagined that I could. I won't say the anger at Bernard just disappeared. Even to today, years later, I ask myself about the way he stood in that courtroom, calm and smug, trying to steal a child for money that was never his to manage. It still makes me sick. But I no longer allow that to make me angry. He's just part of the story, something hiding in the background, while Maya and I kept moving forward. What confirms me, the choice I made, the fight I never abandoned, and the bond that only grew stronger because of it. We sat on the porch one evening, not so many months ago, much like we had the evening of the decision. Maya's all grown up now, all but ready for college, and she looked at me with this mix of appreciation and sadness. She questioned, "Do you ever consider that our whole lives would have been different if Mom and Dad hadn't died?" I was stumped. Obviously, it would have been different, easier, maybe happier in certain ways. But then I told her the truth. I said, "Yeah, it would have been different, but it wouldn't have been us. And I wouldn't trade having you with me for anything in the world." She leaned her head on my shoulder, and we just sat there in silence, listening to the crickets. That's when I realized the real victory wasn't the judge's ruling. The real triumph was that Maya never had to question if she was loved or not, never had to feel like she was just a digit on a paycheck or an annoyance to someone who didn't even care. She always knew that she had someone fighting for her regardless. And to me, the real victory was that I knew that amidst fear, uncertainty, and loss, I was still able to hold on to her. That was enough.